So there was this one guy who was really ambitious with creating D&D characters, but they could never land the mark. In fact, most of the time the character concepts were just overall, well, bad. But this individual was able to learn and avoid these 4 mistakes that I'm going to be going over today, and they were able to change their characters from being kind of chaotic messes to something that is memorable at the game table. Fun fact, that person was me. So, my name is Sensei Suplex. I'm a professional dungeon master, and I ran hundreds, if not maybe even 1,000 sessions at this point, or played in them. These are some of the things that I've learned throughout the years of my DMing experience and just experience with TTRPGs. So, without further ado, let's jump into this video and let's get you guys to where you need to be character-wise. For number 1, it's actually funny that this is number 1 because this is the first tip that I actually really learned or took to heart, and that was to not overcomplicate your character. Here, I'm gonna put my glasses on for this one. But what would happen often would be I would be ecstatic, over the moon for this character concept that I would have and be wanting to play, whether it be just a new class that I was interested in, or maybe a new race or species that that seemed interesting lore-wise, whatever it was. But what would end up happening would be I would take 4 differing character concepts and I would try to all mash them together into this sort of amalgamation of incomprehensiveness. It would often sort of times lead to me where I wouldn't be able to understand exactly what or everything about the character because there was just so much to remember and so much to try to have to pull from, and it would be a struggle to roleplay with. This was seen even worse so for other players at the game table who they don't necessarily know everything about my character, and it was hard for them to sort of understand exactly what I was trying to do, who the character was, and what I was trying to go for. So what I instead tried to do was maybe 1, maybe 2 unique character ideas and try to mix and match them together, if even really 2. 1 is typically enough, and it can be as simple as, hey, I'm a Viking with a magical axe or whatever, right? And that could be enough to sort of build off upon. And it took me so long to realize this. The reason why this sort of works for me, and maybe it will work for you, is we can start asking questions on, well, why did they become a Viking? What was their sort of past like for them to become a warrior? What inspired them to become a warrior? What is exactly magical about the axe? How did they get the axe? And go from there. And just from those little bit of character concepts, I can think of this person being maybe a human sort of a war or hexblade warlock, or maybe even an eldritch knight of the sorts, or heck, maybe they don't even have to be either of those things. They can still be a paladin or whatever it might be. But the point is that less can often be more if we really put a little bit more of the effort and ask questions on how we got to this decision of this character concept. For number 2, this actually flows perfectly in from number 1, and that is to make sure to not ignore the group dynamic. This one is very powerful and impactful. Let me explain why. Oftentimes, I would be more so focused on what my character is going to be able to do or how my character is going to interact with certain things, but I also wouldn't really take into account what the other players are playing besides really their class and their race. However, the group dynamic is so much more than just what's on your character sheet. It's their personality, it's their backstory, it's their goals, their motivations. All of those things play into account for the group dynamic. Now, not all the time will you know each and every single one of these things. However, you can still get a basic idea from this from a session 0. For example, I'll try my best to remember this, but I was on a live play campaign for D20 Deathmatch, and it was essentially Stella Luna was going to be playing a character who was a necromancer, and we all were generals of the sorts. But Stella's main whole thing was that they would be able to command multiple legions and armies of the undead. I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of these individuals. Caustic's character was more so an aspiring general who was trying to figure out exactly how to go about this sort of shift in power or respect that they'd be receiving once they're able to complete this personal journey. What I decided to do was I decided to kind of balance it out with the whole sort of devil on your shoulder and the angel on the other sort of dynamic. More so in the sense of opposites when it came to me and Stella's character. What I decided to do was actually play a character who was a general, but they didn't necessarily command hundreds and hundreds of armies. Instead, they were more so a general who had a dedicated force of a small set of numbers that were more specifically caring about the interpersonal dynamics and relationships between a soldier to a soldier compared to just a general with a mass army of the undead. Afterwards, I figured out why why this was the case through backstory and a little bit more of development in the background. But using that allowed for all three of our characters to have an interesting dynamic that could help sort of shape the narrative and how we were able to sort of get along in the long run, which led to some awesome and interesting character dynamics that also, because I kept that in mind, it was able to really show how the other characters were unique, just like mine. So again, make sure to not ignore the character dynamic. It can be the thing that can turn a pretty generic D&D party or people who can kind of overlap each other, or one of the most memorable and unique, either chaotic or awesome bunch of individuals that you could imagine. We're about to jump into number 3, and before we head exactly there, be sure to hit the like button if you guys are enjoying this video so far. It'll let me know that you guys are enjoying what I'm doing, and let me know if you want to see more videos like this talking about character creation or whatever in the future. So thank you guys again. Number 3 is one that I rarely ever get to talk about, but it's one thing that I've actually learned only recently, and that was I struggled heavily when it came to foreshadowing my backstory. Now, a lot of the time, and I've seen this a lot more recently with Critical Role and how a lot of characters keep their stories and backstories secret rather than immediately spilling them out up front. And essentially, I like to do that as well. But one thing that I have sort of learned is that, or kind of recognized over the years, is that oftentimes I would just reveal too much all at once. I would immediately just spill all the beans about my backstory, and typically it'd be only really within the first 5 sessions rather than having that sort of slow build up throughout the entire campaign. Instead of dropping just a bombshell at session 12 or 14 or maybe 20 or whatever it might be, halfway through the campaign or whatever, I would end up just spilling all of the main important information that I was trying to keep secret just all at once, and it wouldn't land. No one would really care in character, and it would just kind of feel meh. And soon after, for me specifically, I would lose interest in playing the character because it just wasn't what I expected from it. And I think it's more so because we are, as players, again, we're super excited to talk about our character and be able to really be engaged and role play what they're all about and more. But when we're so excited, we just have to tell somebody. We just have to tell and share the world and show like, oh, we're such a unique, special snowflake a lot of the time. And because of that, it kind of leads into just oversharing or overspilling all the beans. So how exactly did I help out with this? Well, in simple terms, it was just a case of show but don't tell. Show exactly your character acting in a specific way that makes sense for their backstory, but you don't necessarily have to tell them why they're doing it or tell them why this is so crazy, strange, or unique. Players are smart. Give them credit. They can figure things out and they can put 2 and 2 together. And the more that you show and you don't necessarily tell, the more eventually people will begin to start connecting those things to your character, that it wasn't really a one-off sort of thing. For example, if my gunslinger character sees the wizard casting fireball and they scram away in fear, I don't necessarily need to tell the party that, oh, he's running away because he's afraid of magic. We don't need to say that. Players can probably figure that out and assume. And if they don't, that's perfectly fine. The second time, again, I can just show but don't tell. Maybe the sorcerer decides to cast magic missile and the same thing happens with my gunslinger diving for cover because they're terrified. Eventually the players will be able to figure it out that, hey, this character probably has something with them with magic. And then it'll maybe even inquire them to ask about it at some point. But think about it from your character's perspective. Do they want to talk about it? Do they want to hide it from anyone to know? Think about it. Role play it out and go from there. Now, there's another YouTube channel that goes into far more depth and detail with it or with this topic and subject. They I'm gonna recommend them in the channel, but it is Play Your Role. They actually do awesome content over there, so highly recommend checking out their stuff after you get done watching this video. But before we do that, we do got to go to number 4, so stay with me. Number 4 is something that I struggled with for a long time, and that is failing to remember that your backstory is just that, the backstory. The starting point, the launch point. It isn't necessarily the adventure, and it is not the only thing that can define your character throughout the entire story that you and your other fellow players and DM tell. After learning this, I will die on this hill. Now, backstories are amazing. I was the individual who wrote out tons and tons of pages and more about my backstory. I would write out so many different things that really didn't matter all too much, but it was for me. But one thing that I had to eventually understand and learn was that those things are nice, but a lot of the time, some of the more depth-defying changes and interesting and especially memorable changes the character can go through are the things that are actually happening in the adventure. A lot of the times, I eventually shifted the mindset of having a stagnant 2D character that doesn't really grow or change throughout the story to having a more three-dimensional character where the story itself affects who they're going to be at the very end of it. The more I thought about it, it made really no sense on why my character was so stubborn the way they were based off of their, funny enough, their own backstory. Let me tell you exactly what I did and how this sort of helped me. Well, essentially what I did was I wanted to go a little bit on the deep end. I wanted to do an experiment, and a lot of people play amnesiac characters and stuff like that. There's nothing super crazy with that. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to play a character who literally was a blank slate. They didn't even have a class. The only thing that they had was their race, but they didn't even know what their race really was. And it was such a wackadoodle race. It was the Verdan. And so no one even knew what it was really in character either. And the whole concept of them was the journey, the adventure itself would help me or help the character decide what they wanted to be for the rest of the campaign, what class they would end up sort of being by the end of it. They started as a basic class. The fighter was the easiest one to go through with, and eventually after learning and figuring out their personality and what they wanted and what they strived for, turns out that they were made to be a paladin. However, not exactly just a paladin. Though they wanted to sort of uphold sort of righteousness to a degree, maybe the means of doing so wasn't really the greatest, and this was impacted and changed and morphed because of the party that they were in, because of the environments they were in. They were in Barovia. They were in a neutral-ish party per se. That was able to have them sort of change and shift dynamically where they didn't just become from a fighter to a paladin, they actually became a paladin rogue. And this is all because I let the adventure shape who the character was going to be, and it changed their personality, it changed what they wanted in their life and more. So am I saying that you have to do this? Absolutely not. This is just something that I did that helped me out. And what I learned from the experience is that you can truly see how a character sort of shifts and grows. And for me, that was just an interesting sort of thing. So maybe it's something that you can try, and it also sort of opened up my perspective on just how impactful things can really be to an adventure, especially when you're diving in dungeons and fighting for your life almost every other day. So without further ado, that's the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, make sure to hit the like button or subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video for more content. Bye, y'all. Have a good one.